Um, and just to change gears, you've mentioned your experience of fulfilling a role as a caretaker for your mom. And, I could only imagine how difficult that transition was for you and your family. How did this impact your mental health, and what healthy actions did you do to overcome and manage this?
Yeah, and I want to emphasize with the last tip of scheduling and calendar blocking that you can literally calendar block time to do nothing. Like there can be
Yes.
a block of 4 hours where you say this is Brianna's do nothing time or Brianna's self-care time, whatever it is, just to make sure that you also don't forget that instead of I'm gonna get ahead of my homework or whatever it is, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes again we keep working and we forget to do those activities that help us recharge. So it doesn't always have to be, an activity. It can be self-care time or detachment time that you block off there, and that can remind you, not to deprioritize that. But in terms of how becoming a caregiver impacted my mental health, it was definitely difficult, and it brought mental health to the forefront for me
Yeah.
because it was something that, again, I generally took for granted. um, Overall, I had ups and downs like anyone else, but being a caregiver, there's just a lot more demands and a lot of things that are pulling at your attention.
Mhm.
And it can get to a point where you realize that you're really tired and maybe for me, not as patient, and you don't realize that it's because you haven't been taking care of yourself as much and that the caregiving is taking a toll. I think sometimes we don't think about that as caregivers because the caregiving is such a fulfilling activity in terms of you're taking care of someone you love, right? So how can that have a negative aspect to it? But at the end of the day, it takes a lot of energy. And
Mhm.
when you're running on E, like a car that you have the tank on low all of the time, it's not going to run as well.
Yeah.
And as people, we're going to kind of do the same thing, right? So again, I realized that as a caregiver, I wasn't taking enough time to recharge. So what I did was I started taking 1 day a week that I didn't do anything for anyone else. As selfish as that may sound, it's kind of what it took because Monday through Sunday, before I started these kind of self care Sunday practices, I was doing everything for everyone else in terms of my job, my mom, my friends, whatever other folks needed me to do, that's what I would prioritize.
Yeah.
So it really helped me to take 1 day where I did what I felt like I needed to do, what I felt like recharged me, and that helped me reset and create more space to do stuff for other people again the following day. And that just made a really, really huge difference. And at first it was hard because my mom was definitely like, "Oh, I'm asking you for this one small thing." And
Yeah.
if it wasn't an urgent thing, even if it was small, I would have to say no in order to establish this boundary for myself because,
Yeah.
you say yes to one small thing and then it's like, oh, well,
Oh,
how about this thing and then that thing? So I had to be really firm about protecting my self care Sundays. And to be honest, that has kind of fallen off a little bit for me. And I've been kind of doing smaller chunks of self care in those mornings where I have the time to myself.
mhm.
But for the stint that I did those self care Sundays, I noticed a really big difference in my mental health. So yeah, I think realizing that even as a caregiver, you need time to be selfish, and that's not always a bad thing because it helps you show up better um, for the people you care about afterwards. That was something that was really key for me because my mental health was definitely suffering when I did not prioritize my own needs.
Yeah. And I think it's just it's really important to have that level of self-awareness where you can sense the patterns of like, oh wow, am impatient today more than I typically would be. And I wonder why that is. And then you start to realize the things that helped you not show up or react in that way. You either have fallen off on, or you need to do more of. And I definitely relate to this. I live with family, and I'm Caribbean culture, so boundaries is something that is constantly everyday battle. So it's definitely something that I very much so relate to. And it's just so important just to have that open communication and just knowing your limits, because I feel like it's just all about how you communicate it too. I feel like when you see yourself more angry and aggravated, it's just good to take that time to yourself, or to just evaluate certain things about your routine that you kind of need to add on or do more of to make yourself feel better. Because ultimately, that's nobody's job but your own.